recorded today. We just like to record our sessions for future playback. Also, I would like you to mute your phone if possible, just to reduce the amount of background noise, just to make it a little bit easier for everyone to hear. We have a manageable size of people in this session today, meaning that if you do have questions as we're going through this, just go ahead and unmute your phone and ask a question, and I'll be happy to address it. If it's something that I feel is a little bit off topic or needs some in-depth discussion, I don't want to necessarily take away from the agenda, so we might address that at the end. So, but as you have questions, go ahead and ask them. Okay. All right. So let's run through the agenda for today. What we're going to be covering. We're talking about year-end processing within the software. And why is my screen not advancing? There we go. Okay. So year-end processes. What do they actually do? Well, there's a couple of things that they do. They get the software ready to accumulate numbers and kind of clear out balances for the following year. And as we go through each of the modules that we're looking at today, I'm going to give you some indication as to specifically what those items are. Just as an example, you know, in payroll, you have the year-to-date amount gross pay. That amount gets cleared out to start clean for the next year. Okay. There are some optional and required procedures that you go through in year-end. And we'll talk about the required ones, and we will also talk about some of the optional ones. And the optional ones really has to do with archiving data, taking some of your jobs and moving them to another database, your employees and archiving those. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well today. Within the payroll closing process, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take this outside of, normally we go through payroll first, but we have found that there are some people in the audience that do not have payroll. Pretty much everybody has GL, AR, and AP. So we're going to focus on those first, and then we'll get into payroll. And payroll is the one that's a little bit more involved in certain areas anyway. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up these slides as we talk about each module. The first one that we're going to talk about is general ledger. Before we even get into the modules, though, I would like to talk about the timing as it relates to the year-end updates, what versions are supported, when those versions should be applied, and so on. Okay? So the year-end versions that are supported this year, you need to be on either version 15 or version 16. With version 15, if you are on version 15, there is an update 7 that was released about a week ago. And that update 7 needs to be applied to make you compatible for year-end. And again, in a moment, I'm going to talk about what that means when I say compatible for year-end and the timing of it. If you are on version 16, you're going to want to install revision 5. It's the major software release version 16, revision 5. There is no update for it. It's just all included in revision 5. So again, if you're on 15, you want to load update 7. If you're 16, you want to use revision 5. Okay, so now let's talk about the timing of when we want to have those updates installed. Those updates primarily impact government reporting. So if you're on version 15 and you haven't applied version or update 7 yet, you will still be able to close the year in general ledger, still be able to close the year in AP and AR and so on. It's really the government forms within Atrix, your W-2s, your 1099s, your quarterly forms, and so on. So let's talk about, again, the timing of it. So as it relates to GLAP, for everything other than payroll, you can apply these updates really at any time. You can apply these updates in December. You can apply them in January, as long as you apply these year-end updates before you print your government forms, your W-2s and your 1099s and so on. Okay? Now let's talk about the timing of things as it relates to payroll with the updates. With payroll, you have to download your taxes. And again, when I dive into payroll, I'm going to do this and go into it in more detail. But with payroll, if you want to begin processing your 2017 payroll, you have to finish up with your 2016 payroll, close the year, download your taxes, and then you can begin processing your 2017 payroll. And keep in mind, that is before you have applied to the year-end update. Again, the year-end update is just important before you print your forms. So a lot of times we get questions on when we have to install the year-end update, when should we be downloading the taxes, and so on. So hopefully that's a bit of an overview. Hopefully that makes sense. And if you have any questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, we will move on to the general ledger part of it. Okay. All right. So on to general ledger. The first thing that you're going to want to do with general ledger, as we have in the slide here, is to record and post all entries for the prior year, if you can. Now, I understand that you're going to have entries that are going to arise after you've closed the year, perhaps sometime in February, March, April, whenever it may be, after your tax returns are done, after your accountants are done with your books or your audit is complete. You're going to have some adjustments to make. You can always go back and make prior year adjustments. But in terms of the normal processing, though, when we close the year, we would want to make sure that we have everything recorded and posted. Okay? Now, let's talk about the timing of when we close general ledger. The general ledger year can be closed at really whenever you're ready, meaning that if the first week in January you're ready to close December and move into January, go ahead and do it. If you want to wait until the end of January to close December, that's fine too. It's not going to stop you from processing anything in 2017 if you haven't closed the year. The only thing that you won't be able to do if you don't close the year is print financial statements for the month of January. Because you can print financial statements for your current month and prior months. You cannot print financial statements for future months. So if you are in the month of December of 16, you cannot print a financial statement for January of 17. So a lot of times people will close their books around the 10th of the month, and sometimes for year end they might leave it open a little bit longer. They might wait until the 20th of the month or whenever you're ready, and that's absolutely fine. Just be aware that in order to print a January 17 financial, you need to be in January of 17. So if you did close the year and you had some prior entries you needed to make, you can still do that. You can still do it, and I'll walk you through that process in a little bit, okay? Also, before you close the year, you should print your financial statements for the month of December. And again, I understand these might change in the future, but go through your normal routine of printing your financial statements, printing whatever ledger reports you run on a regular basis at month end. Okay. At the end of this session, I'm going to talk about backing up, because the third bullet point on this PowerPoint talks about backing up your Timberline General Ledger files. I'm going to talk about that as we get through each of these modules, so I'll get to that at the end. of the general session. Okay? All right. So the fourth bullet point talks about performing your initial year-end close, tasks close year, which we're going to run through together. Okay? And then also that last bullet point talks about going back and opening up a prior period and making an adjustment. So let's dive into the software and run through the process. So within General Ledger, I'm going to expand tasks and close fiscal year. When you get into close fiscal year, you're going to get this message. Have you backed up the master file and transaction file? Again, I'm going to talk about that at the end of the General Ledger session. So I'm going to say yes to that. And it brings up this window. If you have multiple companies within your database, everyone's database could be structured differently. In this particular database, there are multiple companies. In your particular database, if you're not using prefixes or multiple companies in your database, it might just bypass this screen and take you straight into the next screen, which we will see in a moment. So what I'm going to do, I'm first going to close company number 10. We'll walk through that. And then we're going to close company 21. So company 10, I'm going to close that. And you can see in the screen that the current period is December 15 and the year end is December 15. So my database is 1 year behind, so my sample database. So I'm going to roll into January of 16, but the process is the same. This message, this little window pops open, and it tells you how much is going to be closed out to your retained earnings accounts. It doesn't tell you every closing entry that it's going to make. It just tells you how much is going to retained earnings. And then the various income and expense accounts that get netted off to zero will offset that amount. Tells us our proof is zero. That's the amount that's hitting retained earnings. I click accept. And this message pops up. And it says the calendar screen allows you to modify the period end dates for future fiscal year ending 2017. Now, keep in mind I'm 1 year behind. This would be for year end 18 if you need to do it. Now, what does this mean and why does this pop up? I'm willing to bet that everyone in the audience, their month ends on the last day of the month. So as in with this database, January is going to end on the 31st and February on the 28th and so on. Every once in a while we have a customer that has a 5-5-4 type of scenario where the month always ends on a Saturday or a Sunday. And the first month has 5 weeks, the next month has 5 weeks, and then the next month has 4 weeks. And it goes through the next quarter in the same manner. When they close the year, it allows them to change those period end dates for upcoming years. But if you have that situation and you want to get into this a little bit more, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume everyone is on a month-end type of calendar, in which case you just accept the month-end dates and you click OK. And by the way, if it was a leap year, as it will be, with the year 2020 will be the next leap year, it will show 29 days. So it's smart enough to do that. All right. So we click OK, and I'm just going to click Start, and that closes the year for me. Now, the journal report that it creates, let me get to that. So the journal that it created automatically shows me all the debits and credits with a closing entry, debiting and crediting my income and expense accounts to zero them out. The offset goes to retained earnings and my debits and credits balance. Okay. And your database might be set up so that these journals automatically print to paper, or we can set up the system so that they automatically print to a file, as I have in my case here. Okay. So I mentioned that I'm going to close the year twice in General Ledger. That was for company number 10. Now I want to close the year for company 21 because I've got more than one company in my database. So I'm going to go back to close fiscal year. Again, I get the message for backing up, which I will talk about. And you will notice company 10 is now in the new year in the month of January. So now I'm going to close company 21. And I get this message. I didn't get this message the last time. What does it mean? Prior year adjustments have been found. Prior year will be closed. Current fiscal year will have to be run again to close the current year. Okay, so let's talk about what is going on here. Keep in mind, my test database is 1 year behind. So I'm trying to close the year 2015. And this message is telling me that I've got some entries that were made in 2014, prior year entries that need to be closed before I can close 2015. So let's talk about that a little bit. How far can you go back making prior year adjustments? The general rule is you cannot cross over 2 fiscal year ends, okay? So my database is in December of 15, which means I can make entries to 14 if I want, but I can't make them to 13. If I did, I'd have to do some special adjustments, and I can get help from Sage on that, from support. Once I go into January of the following year, so in my case, once I go into January of 16, I can make entries to 15, but I can no longer make entries to 2014 without some major changes that need to happen in the software. So in your case, you're going into 2017. Once you close the year and go into 2017, as I mentioned, you can still make entries to 2016. You cannot make entries to 2015. Okay? So what's happened in my case is that the database has found some entries that were made to the prior year. And it says those have to be closed out first. So I'm going to click OK. It tells me how much is going to be closed out to retained earnings, and I'll accept that and click Start. And now it is not closing the fiscal year for me. It is reclosing the prior year. Okay? So I'm going to go back to close fiscal year. Say yes to that. And now my company 21 is still in December. So I'll choose that. And I didn't get that message about prior years. And this is the amount that's being closed out to retained earnings. I get the message about the calendar that I can change the dates if I want. I don't need to, so I will just click OK. And on we go. So now, if I go back to open close posting period, I will see that both company 10 and company 21 are now in January of the following year. Okay? All right, I want to do something here real quick. All right, pretend you didn't see that. Okay, all right, so we've closed the year and we've moved on to January of the new year. I would like to go through the process of doing a prior year adjustment and reclosing the fiscal year. So I'm going to use company 10 as my example. And I realize now that there was some expense I should have accrued in December of the prior year. So I need to make that entry and then reclose the fiscal year. So these are the steps that you would go through. Within General Ledger, in order to record an entry for the prior year, I have to first open up that period. So I'm going to go to Tasks, Open, Close, Posting Period, choose Company 10, and remove the checkbox off of December so I can make an entry to the prior year. Now I will record an entry with a date of 12/31/18, and I'm just going to pick any account, it doesn't matter. It gives me a warning, GL is for a prior period, and that's okay, it allows me to continue. If I did not take that check mark off of December, it would have stopped me. And again, that depends on your settings as well. So I'm going to make this for $1,000. Just going to use my normal General Ledger journal. And I'm going to credit some accrual account of some sort. I'm assuming I have one here. And we'll just, that says accrual, close enough for me. All right, and that gets the $1,000 credit. So now I have just made an entry to the prior year. And this is something that often happens and trips people up when they do this. If I were to run a trial balance for January, the new year, it would be out of balance by the amount of that entry that I just created. The reason is I debited an expense and I credited a liability account. The balance in that liability account will roll forward into the following year. The balance in that expense account will not roll forward because expenses always start off at zero. So the amount in that expense is not into January just yet. And it's not reflected in my retained earnings balance either because I haven't reclosed the fiscal year. So oftentimes people will make an entry to the prior year, run their trial balance or a balance sheet for the new year in January, realize it's out of balance, and it's a very common support call that we get. So to fix that situation, we just have to reclose the fiscal year. So I'm going to go back to Close Fiscal Year, choose Company 10. I get the message that the prefix is not at year end. Prior year adjustments will be closed. And there's my $1,000 that I just entered. So it's going to take that prior year adjustment that I made and roll that into retained earnings. And now I'm ready to go. And you can do that over and over. You can make prior year adjustments, reclose the fiscal year, make more prior period adjustments, or prior year adjustments, I should say, and reclose the fiscal year again, over and over again, and it doesn't hurt. Now, if you weren't sure, if you had reclosed the fiscal year, maybe we can try it. Choose Company 10, and I get this message: prefix not at year end, no entries made to income or expense accounts. So there is nothing to close to the prior year. So I would just cancel that. Okay, are we fairly comfortable with that general ledger close year process? Anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll take silence as a no. All right. Now let's talk about backing up the database. For those of you who may not know it already, when you print a financial statement, I'm going to actually give you a visual on this. We're going to go to Reports, Financial Statements, and if I print a financial statement, actually, I jumped ahead, sorry. You have the option to roll back the number of periods. So if I'm in the month of January and I want to reprint my December financials, I can roll back one period. You will notice that I can only roll back so many months. If we wanted to say, I want to reprint a financial statement from 3 years ago, I can't do that through here. Now, there are other ways of doing it through the financial statement designer to design a financial specifically going back 3 years ago. But when Timberline is saying, when Sage is saying, hey, have you backed up the database, what they're really interested in is if you have made a backup copy of the database. So if I go to File, Company, Open Company, what some customers do, and I've got a lot of test data out here, but my main company is Timberline Construction. They might, before they close the year, they might make a backup of that company, and it would just be another company on the list called Timberline Construction Year-End 2016. And that you can use to reprint your financial statements if needed. Now, I understand that year-end adjustments are sometimes made, so a lot of times what people will do is when they make that adjustment, when they make that backup database, they might wait until, like, I don't know, March, April, when they know they're done with all of their prior year adjustments, and then make a copy of that so they've got a clean database that has the 2016 year-end numbers in there for them to reprint if they needed to. I would say of all the customers that we have, probably less than 20% of the customers actually do that. And what a lot of companies will do is they will print their financial statements to a PDF file and just store those and keep those if they ever need to reprint them. But if you are interested in making a copy of the backup, or a copy of your database for archive purposes, there's a knowledge base article that shows you how to do that, or you can contact our office and we can help you with that as well. Okay. So that's what they're referring to when you get that message, have you backed up your data? They just want to make sure that you can go back and reprint financial statements if need be. Okay. All right, so going back to General Ledger, again, we talked about recording and posting all entries that you know of at this point in time. Run your financials, back up your database, perform your initial close, which we did, and on the bottom bullet point, when your accountant's adjustments are received, you can open the period and record the entry. And one bit of housekeeping that I probably should have done is before I made that prior year adjustment, I went to General Ledger and went to Tasks, Open, Close, Posting Period, and I took the check mark off of December to allow me to make that entry. I really should put that checkbox back on December when I'm done with all that, just to prevent people from accidentally making entries to December of the prior year. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint. We talked about prior year adjustments. Okay, some common issues that we run into. We talked about the first one, prior year adjustments will be closed. If it finds entries that were made to a prior year, you should go ahead and close them, and then you will have to close your year one more time. And you might have a situation where if on the second bullet point, the amount displayed in the close year window does not agree with my net income number. That's something that you should verify that the number that's actually being closed out is the right amount. And here's why. Maybe during the year, somebody set up a new expense account. And they set up account number, we'll just make up a number, account 6510. And when they set up that account, they set it up and they didn't change the account type. They left it as an asset. Well, they designed the financial statements. They went into the financial statement designer and put that account within the expense section. So when you printed your financial statements, everything looked good, everything balanced. But that account, 6510, which is set up as an asset, is not going to be closed out to retained earnings. It's going to act like any other asset and just roll the balance forward. So it is a good idea to take a look at the amount that is being closed out and make sure it matches your net income number that you have on your financials. If it doesn't, you're going to want to do a little bit of research, maybe verify that the accounts have the proper account type before you move on. So that's another thing that sometimes happens to people when they close the year in GL. Okay. All right. So that pretty much does it for general ledger, and we'll move on to the next modules unless anyone has any questions on GL.
John, just so you know, this is Kurt. I joined the group late. I was in with the boss.
I didn't hear, who was that?
This is Kurt from Alexco in Seymour, Wisconsin. I joined you late. I was in talking with the boss.
Okay. Well, you know, if there's a question that you have that's kind of quick, we can run through it. Otherwise,
just proceed on.
Go ahead.
Just proceed on. You're fine.
Okay, great. All right. Okay. The next module that we're going to run into and handle the close on is accounts payable. So I'm going to collapse a few of these things. And we're going to go to accounts payable, tasks, and there's actually two things that you need to do in AP. Close the year and close the 1099 year. Because it's possible that a company might be on a fiscal year end of October 31st, in which case, you know, that doesn't match with their 1099 year. So we're going to run this through twice. Close the year. And it tells me that in my database, again, I'm a year behind in my test database. It's going to go from 2015 to 2016. I click Start. Again, it asks the backup question. I click Yes, and it goes ahead and processes it and rolls balances. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. Then I'm going to close my 1099 year and click Start. It's going to go from 15 to 16. So closing the year in AP, as you can see, is pretty darn easy to do. You just need to have everybody out of AP when you do that. So let's talk about what that's actually doing. I'm going to go into a vendor setup window. And we're just going to pick a vendor. I'm going to go to the Totals tab. And you see that there's balances this year, last year, next year. So, you know, and it relates to amount purchased, amount paid, and so on. So when you close the year, it takes the amount in this column for this year, moves them into last year, takes any amount that's in next year. For example, if you had already started entering invoices for January, so it takes any amount in next year and rolls it into this year. And it does the same thing for your 1099s. It rolls the amount from this year into last year and takes anything from next year and rolls it into this year. So a question that's often asked is, should I print my 1099s before or after I close my year? And the answer is, it really doesn't matter. Because if you're going to close, let's assume that your year is in 2016. When you print your 1099s, it's going to ask you, do you want to print your 1099s for this year or for last year? So if you're still in 2016, you would print it for this year because your this year is still 2016. And then you would get the 2016 numbers on your 1099. If you had closed the year and you rolled into 2017, when you get that question, do you want to print your 1099s for this year or last year, you would choose last year. And it displays the year for you. It'll say, if let's say I've closed the year already, it would say, do you want to print your 1099s for this year, 2017, or last year, 2016? Obviously, you would pick the 2016. So the timing of when you close the year in AP isn't really critical. If you want to close it somewhere around the end of December or sometime before the beginning of January, it's fine. The time really isn't critical. But here is something that I do want to caution you on, and it might be a good idea for you to check this now. Not now, I mean, when we're done with this session, check and see what year you are currently in. You can go into your AP settings, and it tells you what your year-end date is and what your 1099 year-end date is. If you go back to your system and this has a date of 2017, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. If it has a year-end of 2015, it means you're still in the prior year. And again, not critical. You can just close it and move into 2016 and then turn right around and roll it into 2017, and that'll be fine. The only time that you will get into a bind is if this date for either the year-end or the 1099 year-end is more than 2 fiscal year ends behind. So if you get into January of 17 and this still says 15, then you've got a problem. So before you start processing anything in January, please check your settings and make sure that you're at least in 16. If you're in 15, roll it forward. If you're in 16, you can roll it forward into 17. That's fine. But you don't want to get into a situation where you're 2 years behind. And here's why. I'm going to go back to the setup vendors. And I'm just going to pick that first vendor, go to my totals tab. If my system is in the year 2015, then this year column represents 2015. This is 2014. This is 2016. Where do my 2017 numbers go? And the answer is they've got nowhere to go. And in earlier versions of the software, it would let you record the 2017 activity, and that number that you just entered for an invoice or a check wouldn't be accumulated anywhere. So you would have these balances that are really misleading numbers. I know in newer versions of the software, they are trying to protect against that, where they won't let you process if you are more than 2 years behind. I know that they did that with AR. I'm not sure if they've done that with AP just yet. And again, it depends on what version you're on. So please, just go into your AP settings and just make sure that you are at least in 2016 before you start processing 2017 data. Okay? All right. So Let's run through the PowerPoint to make sure I didn't miss anything on this. So in late December, you want to close your 1099 year. In about a calendar year, also close your year. Again, it says late December. You can do it in early January, too. It's fine, again, as long as you're not more than 2 years behind. You can print your 1099 preparation reports to see the amount that will be included on your 1099s. And you can also do, within Atrix, a test run of your 1099s to see the amount that print as well. Okay? And, again,
John,
I know I mentioned this.
John,
I'm sorry, go.
Where is the 1099 preparation report? Oh, it's on Reports Miscellaneous?
Okay. You know, it's been a while since I looked at that. It had always been under Reports.
Got it.
Let me see where that's at. Under Miscellaneous, 1099 Preparation Report.
Okay, got it. Yep.
All right. That was a pressure one. I didn't know that off the top of my head. Okay. All right. So you run your 1099 preparation report. And that's kind of a little bit of old school when Timberline did the 1099s before they interacted with Atrix. Now what happens a lot of times is people will just go into Atrix and do a test run, a trial run, and you can do that as many times as you want to, and that works as well. Or you can run that 1099 preparation report too. That works. So again, in terms of printing the 1099s, before you print your 1099s, you want to make sure that you have installed the year-end update, that you have installed either version 15 update 7 or 16 revision 5. Okay? All right. That about does it for AP. And just so you know, we're not going to dive deep at all into the printing of the 1099s today or the W-2s. We have a whole separate webinar on Atrix that we cover that type of information in detail. Okay. All right. So other modules that you need to close. Accounts receivable. I'm going to expand accounts receivable and go to tasks, close year. Again, it asks me if I backed up the data, and I'm going to go, in my case, from 2015 to 2016, click Start, and I've closed the year. And just like AP, within AR, there's year-to-date amounts, invoice amounts, paid this year, last year, next year. It does the same type of thing of rolling those dates forward. So again, this is something else that you're going to want to check. You're going to want to go into your AR settings, and you can do that. I would encourage you to do that this week, and make sure that you're at least in 2016, because you will have a problem if you are still in 2015 and you try processing in 2017. Again, if you're 2 years behind. 1 year behind is okay. 2 years behind will cause you some heartache. Okay. Cash management. You have to close the year in cash management as well. And again, that's another easy one. We go to cash management, tasks, close the year. This one's a little bit different. Remember the other modules, when I went into them, they said, hey, do you have a backup? Then I click yes. This one's just a little different. It makes you just check this little box that we do have a backup. And another reason that they ask you about this is, you know, it's going through the process, whether it's AP, AR, GL, and it is rolling those balances forward. And if there were something to happen, like your file server to crash in the middle of that process, you're going back to, you know, last night's tape backup. So this is just letting you know that, you know, it's kind of an important step, and it's just a little reminder that you should have backups happening on a regular basis. All right, so again, we just click OK, and now cash management is rolled into the new year. and that's fine too. Once again, not a bad thing to do is go into your CM settings, cash management, check what year you're in. If you're 2 years behind, just roll it forward and get at least into the current year and move into the next year if you want to. And again, cash management, AP, AR, the timing of it isn't critical. If you want to do it sometime in December or sometime in January, really doesn't matter. Just make sure you're not more than 2 years behind. Okay, other modules do not have a year-end close. As an example, job cost does not have a year-end close. It has a month-end close, and you would just go through your normal process within job cost. Same thing with the equipment module. If you have that, it will you will go through your normal month-end process. It will just roll you from December and into January. Okay. All right. At the end of this session, I do want to spend a...
Can I interrupt for a second?
Go ahead.
This is Kurt. I've been trying to check some of this stuff. I started here in April, and there was a lot of issues with my predecessor and things that were going on. I just went into the cash management settings, and I'm on 2013.
13?
Yes.
Well, that was a good year.
Yeah, it says year ending date is 12/31/13 on the cash management settings.
Okay. So what that means for you in cash management, not really critical, but I'm going to give you a little visual of what it means to you. Under setup, bank accounts, there are, where is it? I got to find the tab that has it. Okay. Now, things like interest totals, year to date, this year, last year, next year. Those numbers in your system, because you're in 2013, are completely out of whack. But my guess is that you're not relying on those numbers whatsoever. Very few people rely on those, interest totals year to date. Okay? So it's not that big of a deal. So really what you need to do is you need to close the year a few times, roll into 14, 15, 16, and you might as well at this point roll right into 17. But just be aware that these amounts, like once you get into 17, the last year to date amount for interest will not be accurate. You will start to properly calculate information for 2017 as you incur it, but you will not be able to really rely on those numbers for the prior years. So it's not life or death for you, but just go ahead and close the year, and you might as well go right into 2017 at that point.
Okay.
And I want to look at one other thing, because I thought there was one other thing that was impacted by that. No, that was really about it. So not really critical. So go ahead and do that, and it's not life or death for you.
Okay.
All right. So I was mentioning that I do want to talk about archiving data, not necessarily the how-to, but just why we do it and the timing of it, and how that timing can differ from one company to another. So I still want to cover that at the end of the session, but now what we're going to do is we're going to roll into payroll. All right. So items to do, kind of the batting order, if you will. If you have any adjustments that you need to make, for example, if there's some employees paid through a disability insurance that might be taxable, that's really called third-party sick pay. Or you might have a situation where some of the employees in your company use a vehicle for personal use, technically that's income, and the amount of miles and the value of those miles for personal use of auto should be considered income and would be taxable. Another common one is officer life insurance. You know, the amount the company pays for life insurance on an officer is taxable as well. There's some tax implications there. So often those pays are handled with what's called an in-out pay. So let's say it is personal use of a company vehicle. If I use my vehicle for personal use, and that adds up to being, $500 worth of income to me, you create an in-out pay. And what an in-out pay is, it's a pay and an automatic deduction. It happens at the same time. So the pay goes in to make my gross earnings higher for taxable reasons, and then it counts as a deduction, taking it right back out. So there's really no GL impact to this. If you want, you can have no GL impact to it, but you can impact the GL if you want as well. But that's just a way to get the earnings to properly reflect those type of items. If you need assistance with setting up some of those third-party sick pays or personal auto, let us know, and we can have a go-to meeting with you and just walk through it, for your particular situation. Okay? So you're going to want to make sure that you have all those pays updated before you close the year. Okay? The next item on the list is download and install year-end release. Again, the year-end release is for version 15. It's update 7. For version 16, it is revision 5. Okay? So the timing of that, you just need to make sure that is done before you print your W-2 forms and other quarterly forms. You're going to want to make sure that is done. So could you go ahead, you might still be doing payroll for this week in December, and you can go ahead and install the year-end release, do that today if you wanted to, and still process 2016 payroll. Nothing wrong with that. The only critical timing is that you install the year-end release before you print your W-2s. Okay. We're going to want to make sure that you, on the third bullet point, process and post the last payroll of the year and run whatever quarterly reports and other type of reports you do on a normal month-end basis or a normal quarter-end basis. Let's talk about that backup. Back up your Timberline files. I'm going to go back to the software for that, just to kind of give you a visual on the payroll employee setup. You will notice that for the yearly totals for an employee, you have amounts paid prior year and year to date. So if I'm in 2016, we're going to go from year to date 2016. It's going to take these amounts when I close the year and roll them into prior year, and then the year to date numbers for 2017, those will be starting off as 0. Keep in mind that we only have year to date and prior year. We don't have totals going back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Now, the check detail is in the system forever, or for as long as you want it to be there. But these accumulated buckets are not. They do not go back for more than the current year and the prior year. So again, what some people have done is before they close their payroll year, what they will do is they will create a backup of their company files. And so what you would end up with is you would have Timberline Construction, which is your live database, and you would have another one called Timberline Construction, year-end 2016 payroll, or something to that effect. And again, there's a knowledge base article on how to do that, or we can certainly assist with that. So why do people do that? In the old days, before we were involved with Atrix, before we were involved with Atrix, it was a little bit more important to have that backup. Now what people tend to do is you can go back to your Atrix files for the prior year, but also what I encourage you to do when you're printing your W-2s, to print an employee copy to a PDF file. So that way, if an employee comes to you sometime, at the end of the day on April 15th, and they say to you, hey, I just can't track down my W-2, can you give me a new one? Rather than having to go into Atrix and rerun theirs, it's just easier if you've got the entire W-2 run for the employee copy in a PDF file, and you can just print their one page and hand it to them. And personally, I think with having a PDF copy of the W-2s and with Atrix the ability to go into the prior year, it seems like our customers, fewer and fewer of them, are making that backup company that I talked about a moment ago. But there's nothing wrong with doing it. But I would just make sure you do have a PDF copy of your W-2 forms. All right. So once you're all finished with processing 2016, we talked about backing up if needed. You're going to want to close the payroll year. And that is done via tasks, close year. Okay, and I need to verify something in my database. Give me half a moment here. I am in May. All right. I'm going to just jump straight to December. I realize you would never do this. Normally when you close the month, you go 1 month at a time, but I just want to jump into December so I can go through the year-end process. Okay, so we're going to close the year. And you click Start. It asks about a backup once again. We say yes. And that's all there is to actually closing the payroll year. Real easy to do. Okay? Now, as mentioned above in the earlier bullet point, the third one, process and post the last payroll of the year. If you close the year and move into 2017 for payroll purposes, and you realize that you forgot to make some type of adjustment, or you forgot about the officer life insurance pay that needs to be taxable, you can still go back and make the entry to December, but it has to have a December check date in order for it to be reflected in the December numbers. But ordinarily, you're going to want to make sure you're done with 2016, and then you close the year. Before you start processing your 2017 payroll, of course, you're going to want to close the year, but the next thing you're going to want to do is download the taxes. So let's go through how you do that. It's in payroll, and it is under, bear with me for just a moment, it is under Tools, Download Taxes. So I'm going to launch that, download the taxes, and my client number should pre-fill in there. There's this little checkbox to update the tax files after the download is complete. Just go ahead and do that, and it'll update the taxes as well. I'm going to go ahead and click Start. And I'm going to get a printout of this. I'm just going to call it Update Taxes. I get this message. You have selected to update the taxes. This will back up your current tax file for the company and then overwrite them. So it takes the existing tax file, makes a backup of it in case you ever need it, and then it updates the tax amounts. And gives me a message that the tax download completed successfully. And I love this little message. If you use a dial-up connection, please disconnect when you have finished with using the connection. So if you're still using a modem out there, well, you might have some other issues. So let's talk about what that has done. Under Setup Taxes, Tax Rates, I'll look at Federal Withholding. And I like to do this after I download the taxes just to make sure it worked properly. Go into Federal Withholding, make sure that the effective date now says 1/1/17. Because what it means is that it updated the tax tables, it updated the FICA limits, it updated anything that's needed for your federal and your state taxes. If you have local taxes, as we do in Indiana, there are local taxes for your various counties. If those rates change, we want to go into Setup Taxes, Tax Rates, manually change those tax rates, because Sage will provide the tax updates for federal and for state, but not for local. So if you have local taxes and they change, you will need to go into the various local taxes that you have and change the rate if needed. The other thing that you need to do is you need to change your SUTA rates. So I'm going to go to Illinois State Unemployment, and I would have to put in my percent and my limit, again, depending on what state you're working in. I don't think the limit changed for Illinois this year, but the rates obviously changed based on your experience with factors. So you should be getting a notice. You should have received it already from, if just in the example of Illinois, Illinois Department of Employment Securities that has your rate on there for unemployment insurance. So you need to update your own SUTA rates and any local taxes, but the tax download will take care of your federal and your states otherwise. Okay? All right. Any questions on downloading the taxes? Okay. So do keep in mind that something that's important here. And, in the earlier bullet point, it talks about processing and posting the last payroll for the year. And before you do anything for 2017 payroll, download the taxes. So what if you've downloaded the taxes, you've closed the year, and you realize you need to do another check for somebody dated 2016?
Tell them no.
Well, pardon me?
I said
what
tell
was
them
that?
the 17.
Yeah, just tell them no. Just say no. You actually can do it if need be, but there's some steps you got to go through, and I would encourage you to contact Sage Support, or you can contact us and we can help you with it as well. Because what you actually have to do is you have to restore your backup of the tax file that was created, because the tax file has all the 2017 rates. So if, for example, if somebody had reached their FICA limit and now you're going back into last year, well, the FICA limit has increased. I'm assuming it increased for 2017. Haven't looked. But now it's going to charge them at the new limit, which would be wrong. So you actually have to back up your existing tax file, restore the backup that it made when it downloaded the taxes, so you have those rates properly in the system, process that individual's check, and then back up that file and put the new file back in place. So there's a few hoops that you need to jump through. It is doable, but I would encourage you to get guidance from one of our consultants or from Sage Support. Or tell them you can't do it. Download taxes, we talked about that. We talked about updating the SUTA rates individually for your states. Workers' comp. If you have a change to your worker comp rates and you're accruing worker comp as part of your payroll, let me show you where that is stored if you're using this. So it's under Setup, Fringes, and the fringe is WC. And once you're in the worker comp fringe, you can click on this table button here in the lower right. And if your rates change for the new year, you can drop in those new rates for your various states and worker comp codes before you start processing your 2017 payroll. Okay. So if the worker comp rates need to be tweaked, you can do that as well. And then you can start beginning processing payroll for the next year. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about the timing of begin payroll processing. What exactly does that mean? If you have entered time and you have not updated your SUTA rates, or you have not downloaded your taxes or updated your worker comp rates, that's okay, because when you're just entering time, none of the taxes and fringes are being calculated. It's when you process payroll, that's when all those tax calculations and worker comp calculations take place. So you're going to want to make sure that you've downloaded your taxes, changed your SUTA rates, changed your worker comp rates before you process a payroll for 2017. If by chance you messed that up, you can always, fix what you need to, download the taxes, and reprocess the payroll. But you don't want to get too far into the process with, printing checks and so on. And just the farther that you go, the more undoing you have to do. Okay. And then, second bullet point from the bottom, print or electronically file your W-2s using Atrix. And again, I have noted in there, print a copy of the W-2 to a PDF file. And you're going to want to print the employee copy of the W-2. You don't want to give an employee one that says, employer copy on it. So, just make a PDF copy of the employee copy and just archive that somewhere to retrieve if need be. Okay, this last bullet point, transfer payroll checks to history. That's an optional step. And again, I'm going to talk about that kind of bundled together with the other modules when we talk about archiving data. Okay. All right. Any questions on closing the payroll year?
Where do you go to print the W-2s?
Where you print the W-2s, you print them under Tasks, Federal e-File and Reporting. When you launch Federal e-File and Reporting, it will open up Atrix for you. Now, if you haven't used Atrix in a while, you're going to get this message. An update is available for Atrix. After the update completes, please launch this task again. So I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and update it. And by the way, this time of year, there's a lot of Atrix updates happening. And I'm just going to do an automatic update here. And, yep, we want to do that. So it's doing the Atrix update for me now. So again, this time of year, there's a lot of Atrix updates that are happening. It might be a situation where North Dakota has changed one of their forms, or the North Dakota form was updated in Atrix. Well, that might not have anything to do with you, but Atrix doesn't know what forms you use and don't use, so it just updates them all. So just be aware that it's not unlikely, actually I've seen this happen, where you go into Atrix in the morning and it tells you need to do an update, and then later on that day you go back into Atrix and it tells you need to do an update. It can happen that way, where just about every time you go in you have to update it, especially during this time of year. So again, now that that update is done, I can go back to Federal e-file and reporting, which is under tasks. And it opens up the Atrix session here. And again, we're not going through this in any detail today. We have another webinar session on Atrix. I don't know if we've already had that or if that's happening in the future. Honestly, I don't know. I apologize about that. But you would just choose, choose your W-2 form, your 2016 W-2, W-3, and click Next, and on you go. But again, I'm not going to dive deep into that right now. For those of you who have not used Atrix before or who have not processed through Atrix, Atrix is a third-party software that we integrate with, and it allows you to print all the forms, so you don't have to buy the forms ahead of time. They print everything on blank paper. But the W-2 form, if you're printing on the 4-up version, you've got the perforation in the paper. So you are going to want to get that perforated paper just so it's easier to break apart. And as you're going through the processing, it tells you, we're going to print the employee copy, insert the 4-up perforated paper. So you can contact Timberline Forms to get those forms if you're interested. Anyway, I wanted to mention one other thing about Atrix. Atrix allows you, with the software that you own, Sage, Timberline, it integrates with Atrix, and you can print all your forms for no additional cost. You can also file things electronically. I know some companies that have printed, that they have Atrix really do everything for them. Atrix will print the forms, they will mail them to the employees, they will file things with the feds and the states, and they take care of everything. You, of course, have to go through the process of doing it in Atrix to get those numbers prepared. But then from there, you set up an Atrix account, and they take care of everything. Now, they do charge for that, and it depends on how many employees you have, but there is a charge for that, so just be aware that that's an option for you. So you can print all the paper forms and file them yourself for free. If you want Atrix to print and distribute those forms for you, they can do that for a fee. Okay. All right. Any other questions on the payroll year-end, the timing of it?
John?
Is there a way we can get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes. What I'm going to do is, let me get you an email address. I am going to send this PowerPoint to Mallory at our office, and let me get her email address for you. All right. You're going to want to send an email to Mallory P. It's MALLORYP at corner-sol.com, and just ask her for just tell her you were in the session today and you want a copy of the PowerPoint. She doesn't have it yet, but as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to send it to her so she has it for you. Okay? Or if you want to just send an email to me, that's fine too. I am John C. at corner-sol.com. I'd be happy to send it to you as well. So either send an email to me or to Mallory, and we'll send it off. Was there another question that I heard? Yeah, no problem.
Yes. John, you had mentioned earlier about saving the W-2s to a PDF via Atrix, and I had tried that some time ago for the purpose of imaging those PDFs, and it doesn't seem to put each individual W-2 on its own separate page. Is there some way, it was actually putting 4 W-2s onto one page. Is there a way to break that off so that it's putting each individual W-2 on its own page?
Not to my knowledge. What people have done is if they just put it in one big PDF that has everybody on it, and they save that, and if they need to reprint a certain employee's W-2, then what they do is they go to the page that has that employee on there along with 3 others and print it off on the perforated paper. They keep some of that perforated paper and just tear off his and give it to them.
Okay.
So
it's
now
really not going to work for us in terms of imaging because it needs to be on its own page.
Oh, is this something that you have the employee with the ability to go on to like a web portal and grab their own stuff?
Right. So,
okay.
Yeah.
The only, I think you have to have a version of Adobe Writer to do that. I have not done that myself, but I think you need to have Adobe Writer. Now, even with that, because Atrix is printing 4 to a page, I don't know if you can get Adobe Writer to put, 1/4 of that form, that page, on its own page. I'm not really sure. I apologize. I don't have a good answer for that, but I know for a fact that you would probably need Adobe Writer to be able to interact with that.
Okay. The other question I have, you mentioned something about having a separate session for Atrix.
Yes.
Do you know the dates for that?
No, I don't off the top of my head.
I do. The next one is the 3rd.
The 3rd. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad somebody came prepared to class today.
Also,
Tuesday.
For those of us that attended this session, will we receive a notice for the Atrix webinar on January the 3rd?
I know that our entire year-end schedule was sent out with a blast email that included this session, the Atrix session, and several other sessions. But again, what I would suggest that you do is contact Mallory. The email address that I gave you a moment ago, Mallory P. If you have any questions or if you want to get signed up on that, you should be able to sign up on our website as well. But the easiest thing to do would be to contact Mallory, and it's MALLORYP. And I'll come back to that just if you want to.
Okay.
Her email address.
We had some real issues with importing and combining companies and sending that off to Atrix as one.
Yeah, that's covered in our Atrix session.
Okay.
So I do know with the W-2s, if you do a PDF of just the employee copy, each page is for the same employee. I just pulled up mine from last year, and the employee copy is for the same employee.
You're right. You're right, because on that employee copy it has copy A for the or copy B for the federal return, copy C or copy whatever for the various state. You're absolutely right. Thank you very much. I forgot about that.
Okay.
Yes, the employee copy prints that way.
I had done a test run, and I had 4 different individuals on one page.
Yeah, but that might not have been the employee copy. That might have been the copy for the federal government, or it might have been a state copy or an employer copy. But you're absolutely right. Whoever chimed in there, thank you. And that was the employee copy is all 4 images of the same employee, but with different forms in the lower right corner of each.
Saved onto PDF.
Yes. Yeah, I have. This is Kirk. Yeah, it does. When you do the test run, it shows you your employer copy only.
Oh, it shows you your employer copy only. That was
Yeah.
okay. That was the issue.
Yeah, you have to go in and actually do them, and then you can save the employee copy separate, the employer copy separate, the Fed copy separate, all as PDFs. You have to do them all individually, save them separately, but the employee one is 4 on the same page because I've had to reprint them for my employees in the past. And you can just email them the one page if they just want it emailed too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was a brain cramp on my part. It's been a year since I've printed them. So anyway, regarding the Atrix session on January 3rd, Mallory P at corner-sol.com. Just email her, and she will be able to get you signed up and get you the information that you need.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay. Before I get into archiving data, any other questions on the year-end processing, payroll, or anything else for that matter? Okay. All right, so now we will move on to archiving of the data. This particular session that we're in today is not designed to be a how-to on every module on how you archive the data. The method by which you archive the data differs from module to module. So as for instance, payroll, you could, or I'll say accounts payable, you can just move your checks from the current file to the history file. So why would you want to do that? Well, if you've been on the software for a while, maybe for a number of years, and you have a lot of data, and you're starting to see that some of your AP reports are running slowly, typically when you're running an AP report, like maybe it's a check register for the current month, and you have a report that you put in a beginning date and an ending date, and it prints just that data for the month. Behind the scenes, what the system is really doing is it's looking at every check within that current file, or the master file in this case, and looking to determine, does it fit within this date range? If so, I'm going to include it on the report. If not, I'm going to skip it. But it is looking at every check to see if it should appear on there. So if you have 5, 10 years worth of data, or even maybe less than that, but a lot of volume, it can start to slow down your system a little bit. So what you can do is you can move some data from the master file in AP to a history file. Now, you can always go back and run reports on that history file, but you don't want to be too aggressive with the cutoff date. So here's what I mean by that. So let's say you've been on the software for 10 years, and when you're doing your day-to-day work, you might be looking at information in AP for this year and last year. Mostly this year. You might look at a few things for last year. You hardly ever look at anything going back 2 years ago or before. So you can take that information and move it to a history file. Again, you can always report off it, but since you're not going to be reporting off it very often, when you run your typical reports, your regular reports, you would just use the current file. So I'm going to go to an AP report just to show you what I'm referring to. I will just go to, what would be a good one? Reports, invoice registers. I'll just go with invoices by job. And you get this message, this little box that pops up, and you see it on just about every report that you're running. You can see in my case the AP history file is grayed out because in this test database I haven't archived anything to history. But if you wanted to run a report, and let's say the year 2014 and prior was in the history file, and if I'm running a current month check register or invoice register, I would only choose the master file. Now, I have seen people do this. I have seen people, when this message comes up, they click every option here and click OK. Well, if you've archived things to history, and you're choosing the history file every time you run a report, you've accomplished nothing by archiving the data. So it's intended to make reports run faster, but the report will only run faster if the report that you're running is not looking at the history file in that particular case. So you can move things to history to make things a little bit more efficient, but you should have a game plan for that, okay? So the question might be, how aggressive do you want to be? You might say, well, I hardly ever look at activity going back 2 years ago, so I'm going to go through 12/31/14 and move things to history. Or you might be in a situation where your jobs, a lot of your jobs last 2 to 3 years, and you often run invoice registers by job. So in that case, if I use 12/31/14 as my cutoff date, that might be a little too aggressive for your particular company. So the cutoff date that you use might be different from a cutoff date that somebody else uses. It depends on your situation. So what I would encourage you to do is schedule a little bit of time with one of our consultants, myself or somebody else, where we can kind of put a game plan together of how often you should archive and what cutoff dates you should use. And the cutoff date that you use might differ from module to module. You might be very aggressive with payroll because you probably hardly ever look at last year's payroll information, and when you do, you can use the history file. But AP, because you run reports that are invoices by job and you have some jobs that last long, you might not want to be as aggressive as you are with payroll. So you need to have a game plan together, because if you're too aggressive with moving things to history, and as a result you find that you have to use the history file every time you run a report, then again, as I mentioned a moment ago, you really haven't accomplished anything. Okay.
John?
So, yes.
I'm sorry, I heard most of the conversation that you did, but where is this? I had to step out for a second. Where is that data file selection located?
It's when you run a report. I'm just going to click on invoices by job, and it asks me. Now, it doesn't do this for every report. Some reports are designed that they only look at the master file, so it doesn't come up with this message.
John, I'm sorry. Where you were talking about moving it, where is the function to move this stuff to history?
We're not going through that in detail in this session, because the way you do it varies from module to module.
Okay, got it.
And I don't want you being too aggressive. What I'm trying to kind of give you an overview of today is just the different things that you can do with the software. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in moving things to history, schedule a little bit of time for a go-to meeting with either me or another one of our consultants, and just kind of put a game plan together of, I would try to gain an understanding of your business, how long your jobs last in duration, kind of put a game plan together for how aggressive we want to be with the cutoff dates. And then I would walk you through the how to do it at that point in time, because it differs from module to module. Okay, so this session today is not necessarily intended to be a here's how you archive session. It's geared more towards year end, but archiving things, kind of, and you can archive at any point in time, but sometimes, as people are closing out the year, they have that archive kind of in their mind that maybe they should do it. All right. So another thing that you should be aware of when you're archiving data, so I'm going to go back to that report just to bring up that screen, invoices by job. If I'm archiving AP, I'm going to be prompted for a cutoff date, and I might choose 12/31/14 as my cutoff date. You need to be aware that it's more of a gray line than a hard black and white line, because if I tell the system, I want to move my checks dated 12/31 and 14 to history, it can only move them to history if everything related to that check has been fully satisfied. So let me give you an example. I have an invoice dated 2014. I cut the check in 2014, but there's retainage that was not paid until 2015. If I'm moving data to history using 12/31/14 as my cutoff date, none of that information will move. It can't move the check because the associated invoice isn't fully paid by that cutoff date. So as a result, it's a gray line. You will ask yourself, okay, I'm looking for an invoice for a vendor. Is it in the history file or is it in the master file? Well, what's the date on it? Well, it's 12/31 or it's 2014 invoice. Well, it might be in the history file. It might be in the master file. You don't really know. That's another example of why you don't want to be too aggressive with your cutoff dates, because you want to have it in a situation where you don't think about what's in the history file very often. But if you're regularly running reports on information from 2014, then you're going to need to run that off the history file and the master file. And once again, when I'm running a report off of both, it's combining all the data, and I really haven't gained anything by archiving. So that's why I think it's important to kind of have a game plan on how aggressive we want to be with these cutoff dates. And again, like I said, the game plan we come up with for company A might be different from company B. Depends on the processing and the timing of your jobs. Okay, one other thing to mention about archiving data. And I'm going to go back to File, Company, Open Company. Not every module works the same way. The example I was using a moment ago was AP. And with AP, everything stays within the database. So in my example, Timberline Construction, I would be moving AP information from the master file to the history file, all within the Timberline Construction database. And that's fine. That's how it works. There's nothing wrong with that. Job cost is a little different, though. What you can do is you can set up another company. My company is called Timberline Construction. I would have another company called Timberline Construction Old Jobs, or Job Archive, or call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And what you would do is the transactions related to certain jobs and the jobs and the commitments themselves would move out of your live database and move into an archive database. So if you want to run a report on a job from 5 years ago, you just go to that different company folder. So it doesn't work the same way as AP. It allows you to just, see, AP, you're moving invoices, but the vendor is going to stay there in the master file. With job cost, you're going to want to move the transactions, but you're going to want to actually get the jobs themselves out of your database because they're just taking up space, and when you click on list, you're seeing jobs from 5 years ago, and you don't need to see that. So again, we want to have a game plan on how aggressive we want to get with our dates and the method by which we want to do it. Payroll is similar also, where you can actually move your employees to a different database to get them out of there, so that way, if you're running a report and you click list and it shows you a list of the employees, you're not seeing everybody, every union carpenter you had going back 10 years. So there's different ways of doing it. It's a discussion that I think is worthwhile having if you feel that your reports are starting to slow down a little bit based on the fact that you've had a number of years of data in the system. So if you're interested in doing that, you can contact our office, let us know. We'd be happy to spend, a little bit of time, have maybe a 1-hour go-to meeting with you where we can cover a game plan for your company specifically and how you actually do it. Okay? All right, so any questions on archiving data?
I have a question. This is
Sure.
Maggie. I was archiving data after I closed payroll and received a message that said, because I was moving current to history in payroll, and it said if you move checks to history before generating W-2s and other government forms for the calendar year associated with them, the check amounts will not be included in government form amounts.
Maybe. Here's the situation there. I'm going to go into payroll, just an employee setup, just to give you an idea of what that comment is talking about. Let me expand payroll. You go to setup employees. Okay. We're just going to pick this employee. And this, what I'm looking at right now is information on the employee record. It has year-to-date accumulated amounts for regular pay, gross pay, deductions, and so on. I can look at my pays, and I have year-to-date amounts over here, year-to-date pay for regular overtime, vacation, and so on. Same thing with my taxes and fringes and deducts. For example, my med, I know how much I have for year-to-date tax, year-to-date subject to, year-to-date taxable. I have pretty much all the information that I need to print the W-2s, all from the employee and related employee tax and fringe and pay records. Every once in a while, in order to properly fill in the amounts on the W-2s, you have the system actually needs to look at the checks themselves.
Right.
It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. As an example, if you recall, there was the time a couple of years ago, I forget the exact timing of it, where I think they reduced the amount of the Social Security tax. The employee portion, which is normally 6.2%, I think they dropped it 2% to like 4.2. And they had that running for a period of time, but when they either started that or ended it, they did it in the middle of the year. So in order to properly get your W-2 numbers, the system had to actually look at the check records to determine what the amounts are. So that's a long-winded explanation as to why you would possibly need the checks in the system to perform the W-2s. So it's best to play it safe, to print your W-2, if you are going to archive data, to print your W-2s and get that done and out of the way before you archive anything for the prior year. Just play it safe, because a lot of times we don't know. You know, the year-end release will come out, and it happened to us one year, where for years, you know, it never used to look at the checks. And then all of a sudden, because of that mid-year thing, it had to do it, and it kind of caught us off guard. So just play it safe, and don't archive any of the employee checks until after you've done your W-2s.
Okay. Otherwise, you have to go to your backup if you've already
Exactly.
archived.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're just adding steps of complication to it. Yeah. So, and again, you know, I mentioned the year-end. I mentioned the archiving thing as part of the year-end process, because that's when people typically have it in their head. Okay, I'm closing the year, I should move things to history. But you can do it at any time. A lot of times people will wait until, you know, March or April, and then they'll start archiving things. And that's fine. You know, I mean, you've got enough going on at year-end. You know, worry about the archive thing once you've gotten through all your tax season and your audit and what have you. But again, I just want to reiterate, it's good to have a game plan, because if you're too aggressive with moving things to history, you're going to find yourself running reports from the history file more times than you should, and you've not gained anything for yourself. But anyway, but thank you. That's a very good point about about the timing of moving it as it relates to W-2. So thank you.
And thank you for helping.
No, thank you. Okay. Any other questions that anyone has? Okay. I will take that as a no. Let me just take one last look at my PowerPoint just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. We talked about the versions on the front end. And one other thing to note, if you do have estimating, you know, a common mistake that sometimes people make, they'll put like update 7 out there for accounting, and they'll forget about estimating. Those updates usually go hand in hand. If there's accounting update for accounting, you know, accounting update 7, there's also estimating update 7. So you'll need to do that as well if you have estimating. And one other thing to note is that occasionally a crystal report after you do an upgrade will break. There's every now and again you have a change in the data structure, and it depends on how far back you're going. So if you're upgrading like from version 13 to 15, there's a good chance that some of those crystal reports would have to be adjusted. And the reason is sometimes new fields are added to the database or the parameters within a field change, and Crystal doesn't know that until you verify the database and it updates all that. So just give yourself a little bit of time. After you do an upgrade, it might be a good idea to just check, you know, some of the key Crystal reports you rely on a regular basis.
John, this is Steve at Howard Immel. Can I catch you quick?
Sure, go ahead.
We've got Sage Paperless. I assume upgrading to 15.7 will upgrade Sage Paperless also. Should not have a problem.
I do not believe, if you're already on 15 and you're just going to update 7 on that, I do not believe that there is a corresponding Sage Paperless upgrade for that purpose. It's normally if you were to go from like version 14 to 15, there would be a Sage Paperless update that would go along with that. But just for the accounting update, typically not.
Okay. Also, you may not know the answer to this question, but we're on Procore for project management. And I assume I got to let Procore know, or maybe should have already let Procore know that I was updating to 15.7 so they could integrate with it. Do you know anything about that?
I do not know the specifics of Procore as it relates to update 7, but I will just make a general comment as it relates to any third-party products such as Procore, and that is if you're interfacing with a third-party product, before you do any upgrade, you should really make sure that they're ready to go with it. Because a lot of times what will happen is, that, you know, as I mentioned with the Crystal comment, that the database structure can change. And if your third-party software that you're using hasn't gotten their hands on the new version of Sage just yet, then they might not know what has changed or what they need to tweak in their software. So I can't comment specifically on your situation there, but just a general comment. If you're using a third-party product that interfaces with Sage, you do want to check with that vendor before you install any type of update. Ordinarily, no problem. Ordinarily, you know, most people who are on, you know, who stay current, you're probably on version 15, accounting update 6 right now. And then you're just going to accounting update 7. I'd be shocked if any third-party software would break because you're going from update 6 to update 7. But going from version 14 to version 15, or from version 15 to version 16, yeah, there's a good chance that something can break in the interface between Sage, Timberline, and your third-party product.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Anything else?
Thanks, John. This is Jean from Veris. It was always good information from you.
It's great. Jean, great to hear from you. All right.
All right. Hopefully touch base in the new year.
Sounds good. Well, I would like to wish Jean and everybody else a very happy new year and best of luck in 2017. And if you have any comments or questions, on the screen you have my email address right here, johnc@corner-sol.com. You also have Sue Gorski, who works in our office, and I gave you Mallory's email address as well. So contact anybody for the PowerPoint. I will be sending that PowerPoint off to the office momentarily, and that should do it unless anyone has anything else.
Yep. I'm good, John. Thank you.
John,
All right, guys. Thanks for your time. Take care.
Well, John.
Yes.